So I'm not getting any younger. In fact, I'm actually 34 this week, I think. And whilst that's not ancient, it certainly is getting to the point where I notice that I take a little bit longer to recover from training, where I'm slightly more prone to picking up injuries. And this is also compounded by the fact that I'm a parent, soon to be a parent of 2, so yeah, I need to start thinking ahead. If I want to carry on doing this into old age, if I want to carry on training like I did when I was 18, which I do more or less, then I need to plan ahead. I need to train smart, and I need to make sure that I'm strengthening those weaker areas that are more prone to injury. Thus, I came up with this specific routine that I call Fortify, a selection of exercises that I can use either all together in one workout, or I can tack onto the end of other workouts, or that I can spread throughout the day. I call this kind of programming modular. You can kind of tack on these different things that you want that provide different benefits. And in this case, it's all about bulletproofing. These are the exercises that I have selected from my own personal needs and goals and from my own weak areas. You can pick and choose which ones work for you and apply them as you see fit. Without further ado, this is my Fortify workout. Here are the exercises. By the way, if you like any of these clothes, then you can get them in the little carousel thing underneath this video. So first up, we're talking knees, and we're talking the Hindu squat. The Hindu squat is very similar to a regular squat, except for you're on the balls of your feet and you're bending with your knees going past your toes. So if you guys have watched any knees over toes guys, or just YouTube in general, then you know that these days the advice is no longer to avoid knees going past toes like the plague. In fact, we generally consider this to be a great way to strengthen the knees. It's not rocket science. If you have a weak area that's prone to injury, then completely avoiding training it is not the solution. So one of the most popular ways to train knees over toes is with the sissy squat, where you lean all the way backwards and move your knees past your toes, squatting like that. This is a fantastic workout for the quads as well. However, it's also a bit more advanced. It's something that a lot of people can't actually do. And of course, the other issue with this movement is that it's taxing, and the whole point of this workout is that we're just trying to strengthen ourselves. We're adding it on top of our main workouts. We don't want to be taxing ourselves here. That's not the point. So the Hindu squat is a much gentler and nicer way to get into that position where you're squatting with your knees past your toes that isn't going to cause too much damage or stress. The best part is as well, it can be easily adapted, so you just go down as low as you want to if you're experiencing any knee pain. Just move in the range that doesn't cause pain, and you'll gradually strengthen it to the point where you can start to squat all the way down, like this. Now actually, if you're doing it the official proper way, like a real Hindu squat, then there's also some arm movement involved, and there's a specific breathing pattern where you're actually breathing through the nose and you inhale on the way down and exhale on the way up, which is all quite unusual. This breathwork actually brings all sorts of additional benefits because it trains you to breathe through the nose, which is fantastic for all sorts of reasons. However, as we're focusing right now on strengthening the knees, you don't need to worry about that unless you're interested. One of the simplest ways to think about mobility and resilience as you get older is the simple rule of use it or lose it. I know that the day I stop bounding up the stairs is the day that I'm going to stop being able to bound up the stairs, which is why I always try and move as much as I can throughout the day. This is a kind of position, just being able to squat down on the balls of your toes, that everybody should be able to perform. So if you want to make sure that you can still squat down and play with your grandkids when you're older, then using the sissy squat is a great way to ensure that that happens. Next one I'm going to demonstrate is the gamma cast. You've seen me do this a few times on the channel. Basically, it's a fantastic way to train and strengthen and bulletproof the shoulders. For this one, I'm going to be using a heavy club, a club bell, but you can also use other implements, as I'll demonstrate in a moment. Basically, what you're going to do is take your weight, hold it in front of you like this, and then dive it around your head and back to the other side, trying to keep your torso nice and straight as you do. There's a variation of this where you come to 1 and 11 o'clock like so, because holding it in that position is a bit more of a challenge for the grip. So you're getting that extra bang for your buck. But you don't need to do that if your focus at the moment is primarily on bulletproofing. As you can see, we're going all the way around the head. And at the same time, when you're back in this position, there's a little bit of a weighted stretch going on, which is working on mobility. It's also applying traction to the joint, gently pulling it apart instead of always compressing like you're doing when you do something like a military press. And all this makes it fantastic for the entire shoulder region if you want to build stability and thereby prevent injury. It's also just a great exercise, and of course you have the added benefit of core stability on the rotational plane as you try and prevent your body from twisting and bending. The great Gamma reportedly did thousands of these per day, which doing high repetitions of anything is going to ensure you get a massive blood supply to that region, really strengthening the tissue around there, particularly tendons, which don't get as much blood as muscle does. Okay, so the next one I want to show you is one I got from the Squat University Instagram account, and I believe that they got it from somewhere else. So this is the Ballistic Kettlebell Row, and it's probably easiest if I just show you it first and then explain afterwards. So you're going to be in a bent down position like this with your back straight, chest up, hold the kettlebell in one hand, then you're going to row it up and swap and catch. Hashtag pray for my decking. So what's going on here? Well, just like any kind of bent row, you've got an isometric contraction in the erector spinae, so you're nicely strengthening the back to avoid injury. But this movement goes one step further because you're launching the weight in the air and then catching it again. And what this does is it forces you to brace in anticipation of catching the weight. So I've talked in the past about the multifidus. This is the muscle or group of muscles that runs up either side of the spine and helps to stabilize it. It provides spinal stiffness, particularly when it comes to bending and rotating. And its job is to not only strengthen and keep the spine straight and strong, but also to anticipate movement. So when you step off a step and you think you're on the bottom step, but actually there's one more step, or vice versa, and you have that real sudden judder, it's because your body's prepared for one thing, but the reality is different. So this is how we need to think about strength. It's not just about having the strength, it's about applying the strength correctly for the environment, and that involves all the different senses, your visuomotor landscape. So you need to see what's about to happen and brace in anticipation of that happening. And if you think of performing a clean or a power clean or something like that, or snatch, you're about to exert this massive amount of force, and just before you do it, your body needs to brace in all the right places to make you strong and prevent injury. So this is a very light way to practice that. You're feeling the weight moving, you're seeing the weight moving, and you're bracing your core and your spine in just the right way to counteract those forces. So this is a fantastic way to prevent a lower back injury. So another one for the lower back in particular is the good morning. So the good morning is probably well known as the exercise that actually broke Bruce Lee's back, which is not what we want, but we're going to be using it in a very mild way here that doesn't involve weight even. So the good morning simply involves bending forwards, except it's not really a bend, it's a hinge. So if you're doing it with your body weight, feet apart, hands behind your head or on the side of your head, and then you're just going to hinge forwards to bend. And obviously you can go a little bit further, keeping your back straight all the time, of course. When you perform a good morning, you should feel a nice stretch in your hamstrings, which is a great way to prevent injury, particularly because so many of us have short hamstrings, and this is famous for causing injuries in football players and other kinds of athletes. At the same time, it also teaches us the correct hip hinge movement, and it adds just a little bit of extra resistance for the erector spinae, just to strengthen those slightly through a range of motion. The good morning can be performed with a whole bunch of weight on your back. In fact, some powerlifters do this as a way to strengthen their core and their spine for big lifts, such as the squat or the deadlift. However, that's not how I'm going to be using it here. That said, if you do want to add just an empty bar, for instance, and this is a great way to add just a little bit of extra resistance to make the move slightly more challenging. If you do that, I recommend using a lower bar position, because obviously when you're leaning forwards, you don't want the weight to be rolling towards your neck. At the same time, of course, the bar needs to stay over the top of the center of your feet the entire way through. You don't want it in front of you, because then you're at a very bad angle, and if you don't face plant, then you might find that your back gives out. So this is just quite a technical lift, and if you're going to add weight, then make sure you know what you're doing. If you're not adding weight, then you can still imagine that bar being over the center of your toes in order to make sure you're using the correct form. This is another one I learned from watching Knees Over Toes guy, Ben Patrick. And I'm just going to level with you, he's got so much fantastic information. I could just give you a whole bunch of his exercises and they'd all be fantastic for bulletproofing and improving performance as well. This one was particularly useful for me, however, and that's why I integrated it into my own training, and that's the tibialis anterior raise. So basically what you're going to be doing is raising your toes upwards using the tibialis anterior. And the tibialis anterior is the muscle on your shin on the front, and it's responsible for dorsiflexion, lifting your foot upwards. Now you might think this is a kind of pointless muscle because, I mean, you're always pushing through the ground with your foot when you're running or jumping, but how often do you need to lift your foot upwards with any kind of force? Well, one obvious example of how you might train this naturally, if we were in a more varied environment is through swimming. However, it's also important because we use it to absorb a lot of impact when we land from a jump. This is the kind of first line of defense when you're landing from a jump, or when your legs are impacting on the ground as you're running. And this is one of the things that causes shin splints. So to do this movement, all you're going to do, I'm leaning against the wall here, is lean against the wall, and then you're just going to raise your toes upwards as high as you can. Then you can lean the angle back slightly. And the great thing about this is that your legs are going to be in the position that they would be if you were decelerating or often landing from a jump, where your shins are coming down at an angle. And another trick you can actually use is just to walk on your heels with your toes constantly pointing upwards. It doesn't take long for this to create a surprising burn in the front of the legs there. Another thing you can do to try and increase the difficulty slightly is to use a wedge and to put your heels slightly higher than your toes, and this allows you to travel further and increases the difficulty. I also recommend you flip this round and do it the other way so that you're performing a calf stretch and then a calf raise. Next up is one of my favourite exercises, which I've talked about a lot on this channel before. I did a whole video on them, and that's the inverted push-up, also known as the Bodyweight Row, various other names. Basically what you're doing here is you're hanging underneath a bar or parallel bars with your hands, you're extending fully, and then you're pulling yourself up so that your sternum reaches the bar or comes close to where your hands are located. And what you're doing here is not only obviously training the lats and the shoulder to a lesser extent, but you're also maintaining a rigid position with your core once again, and specifically this is an anti-flexion movement. What that means is that your body wants to bend this way. Because your heels are on the floor, your butt wants to sink towards the ground, which means you need to extend, which is anti-flexion. So you're once again bracing the erector spinae, your whole back nice and straight, and just maintaining this kind of rigidity. This is really important because we train the opposite so often when we're doing push-ups. If you do plank, then you're training it specifically, and we're always in a hunched over forwards position when we're sitting at a desk. So in other words, this is what you need to balance yourself out. And if you do a lot of push-ups, it's a really good idea to also do lots of bodyweight rows. An added bonus, if you also make sure that you're fully retracting the shoulder blades when you're at the top of the movement, then this is also going to train your straight arm strength and your scapular control. And this is really useful when it comes to things like rows, because it allows you to support the shoulder more so and avoid shoulder injury as well. Another move from another culture that you might not have used in the past is the sumo squat with shiko. Not like shiko time, this is the leg lift that you sometimes see sumo wrestlers do, where they raise up on one side and then slam the leg down. The sumo squat is really good because it activates the hip adductors, it creates a nice stretch, and it trains your legs and your hips in the frontal plane. We so often move forwards and backwards, never side to side, and this can lead to injury whether you're running on an uneven surface or you're suddenly changing direction. If you don't have that strength there, this can lead to issues, and it helps to keep the knee tracking nicely where it's supposed to be, stacking the joints. Then by adding in that leg raise as well, you're raising your leg up, and so you're strengthening it in both directions. You're also building stability and balance on one leg, which of course is really useful whatever kind of sport you're engaging in. So I highly recommend trying this out. And now there is a proper way to perform shiko. I'd probably completely butcher it, but you don't necessarily have to use the exact same technique. The idea is that you're squatting down nice and low, and then you're raising yourself up and raising that leg out to the side before moving back onto the other side. Shift your leg onto the supporting side. As for the sumo squat itself, you just want to take your feet slightly wider than shoulder width apart, slightly wider than you normally would. Turn your toes out slightly, about 45 degrees, and then turn the knees out as well. Make sure that they're following the feet. You don't want them turning inwards. That kind of defeats the point, and that can cause pain in and of itself. And obviously this builds that sweet hip mobility as well. Next one I've been using, and this is one that's particularly useful for me personally, may not apply to you, is the Camel Pose. And here what you're doing is you're getting onto your knees, and then you're trying to extend the back, focusing on the thoracic spine. You do this by pushing the sternum up towards the sky and opening up the chest, and this will help you to improve not only mobility in your spine, but also proprioception, so that you can actually feel and control the spine. You can also do Ido Portal's favourite, the spinal wave. If you want to do this properly, you need to sit up on your knees and then reach all the way back, and proper yogis can grab their ankles and do all sorts of cool stuff. I'm nowhere near that, but I basically just want to be able to control my back so that I bend more at the thoracic spine and less at the lumbar spine, because that's another way that mobility can really enhance longevity and prevent injury. Because we'd much rather that the thoracic spine was bending rather than the lumbar spine. And if you don't have that mobility, then it's going to have to go somewhere else, basically. If you look at a back bridge, the best ones bend all the way around, and particularly at the middle of the spine, not so much down the bottom. If you're just bending at the bottom, it probably means that you don't have enough spine mobility, also probably not enough shoulder mobility. So you want to work on both of those things. Someone like Dr. Stuart McGill would tell you not to extend the spine in this way because it causes too much compression. Personally, I want to be able to do things like handsprings, so it's not an issue. I do believe that you can do this safely and into old age. However, like I say, your mileage may vary. It depends on what you want from your training. If you're just doing big heavy lifts, you don't necessarily need or want this kind of mobility. As for the shoulders, one of the best things you can do to improve mobility there, and thereby prevent that kind of cascading effect, is hangs, which also builds a lot of grip strength, stretches out the lats, and at the same time, they create traction on the spine, moving it nicely apart, and just helping it to feel healthy and loose. They do say, after all, that you are as old as your spine. Hangs also fantastic because they're an isometric hold, and isometrics are a brilliant way to train anything when it comes to recovery, because you're not moving through a range of motion, thereby you're minimizing the risk of injury, but you're also sending the blood to that area. And just like high flush sets, this can also work as a form of occlusion, basically trapping the blood in the muscle, building up metabolites, and really accelerating that recovery. If you want to perform the hang correctly, with the focus being on shoulder mobility and stretching out the lats, then you want to perform it passively. What that means is that you want to only contract and tense the muscles that need to be contracted and tensed. So you want to relax the rest of the body, and particularly the lats. You might think you're hanging completely without exerting any strength, but then you'll notice that you can actually relax more and shrink down into it further, bringing your shoulders up more and feeling that stretch in your lats. And that's what we want if the focus is mobility, which for me, it is. So this next one I like because we can do it sitting down. I'm talking about wrist curls, both supinated wrist curls and pronated wrist curls. And these are important not only to strengthen the wrists, but also to prevent injury in the elbows. And that's because a lot of the tendons in the forearm, they span both the wrist joint and the elbow joint. For example, you have the carpi radialis brevis, and this goes from the third metacarpal through to the lateral epicondyle at the end of the humerus. And so by strengthening the wrist, you can prevent things like tennis elbow or lateral epicondylitis. So you want to use a weight that's light enough that you can wrist curl, support your forearm on something, and then you're moving literally just the wrist. And the important thing here is obviously balance, because we do so much wrist flexion that we also need wrist extension. Otherwise we're going to become lopsided, and this is what leads to injuries. Now in my video talking about adapting to your environment, I said how it could actually be a reductionist approach to try and chase down every single last muscle group that gets overlooked and to try and create balance that way. This is certainly true. The best way to create balance in your grip is just to use your arms and hands in a lot of different ways. The best way to create hip stability and knee stability is to walk a lot on uneven terrain. The best way to balance out dorsiflexion and plantar flexion is to do some swimming as well. Let the environment shape you because it has more variables to create a more well-rounded physique. However, this isn't always possible, especially if you don't have space to go running through the woods. And so this is where looking at particular weak areas that go wrong and making sure to add in some functional training there can be really useful. And this is why I take issue with people who talk about, strength being strength. As long as you're doing your big 3 lifts, you don't need anything else, because it doesn't work like that. You don't build strong squats and then suddenly you have perfect balance in your forearms, and this kind of focus on just one type of strength is what leads to imbalances and then later pain. And that's why I think it's really important to make sure you're training in balance and not just focusing on one particular skill. Follow the link in the description down below. It will take you to the Bioneer blog, where you'll find not only a full routine using these exercises with sets and reps and things, but also a few additional exercises that I also use as part of my Fortify workout. That's the point here as well. These are exercises that benefit me, that I do on a regular basis, because they train the things that I'm looking for. They fix weak areas and they support the kind of movements I want. You might not necessarily benefit from these same exercises, and that's why we need to look around and we need to find different things and adapt them to our own use. We need to absorb what is useful, reject what is not, and add what is uniquely our own. I just came up with that, no idea, just popped into my head. Anyways, I hope that you can find some exercises in this routine that are useful and add them to your own training and get some benefits as a result. Thank you so much for watching this one, guys. If you found it useful and interesting, then please leave a like and share it around. That helps me out immensely. If you like this kind of training that looks at functional performance and trying to build balance and longevity, then you'll enjoy my ebook and training program, Super Functional Training. There's a discount on right now, and there's a link in the description down below where you can check it out. I also have a print book called Functional Training and Beyond, which is an introduction to the concept of functional training as it applies to athletes and the average Joe. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.